Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation the Car Company Tycoon game, continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 1996. And we have one last model to take a look at, and that's the Comet, which is our high-performance sports car. It's not really a supercar. I would say it's comparable to what you would get with a Corvette, at least it's trying to compete with that type of a vehicle. Let's jump into the base trim here. And first start off with the body. So just as what we had with the satellite, we are getting a penalty because this is an older body, which we can see here again. Red text, old body, safety penalty. In any case, getting into the chassis, we have a monocoque chassis, corrosion-resistant steel. We have a mid-transverse engine mount, double wishbone on the front, and double wishbone on the rear. Now, this is different than the satellite. Well, first off, we couldn't do McPherson strut in the front and McPherson strut in the rear, even if we wanted to. But we're doing this also because we want the better performance as far as sportiness is going. This is definitely a vehicle that emphasizes sportiness over a lot of other things. So that's the way the build is going to go. Now, I initially set up this vehicle with an aluminum panel material, but after building it, I ended up going back and doing corrosion-resistant steel instead. And that was just, I might get into the reason why I did that a little bit later. But that was initially my idea, was to do aluminum, and then I ended up going with corrosion-resistant steel. So just keep that in mind for later. As far as the styling goes, let's take a look around. So for the engine, rear-wheel drive setup, we already mentioned transverse mounting. Let's take a look at that engine. So this is a naturally aspirated engine, 3.6-liter V6 that produces 302 horsepower and 250 foot-pounds of torque. Let's jump into the trim itself and go to our gearbox setup. So this is the first utilization of a 6-speed gearbox by any vehicle that the Edison Car Company has built. So this is a manual gearbox, 6-speed, as I mentioned. The 6th gear is going beyond that estimated top speed to be a economy gear, and the first 5 gears are more acceleration gears. We have a little bit of wheel spin here with 6.1%. 0 to 62 time comes in at 5 seconds, and we have 19.2 miles per gallon. As far as the tire setup goes, I have 235s in the front, 295 in the rear, 17-inch rims, alloy material, and we have sports compound road as standard. As far as the brakes go, I went 2-piston in the front and 2-piston in the rear, and we have solid disc and vented disc in the rear. We have 0 brake fade with this trim. As far as the aerodynamics go, I went with a fully clad under tray. There is a wing on this, and I am using a little bit of wing angle to give us some downforce in the rear, which you can see. And the cooling airflow, we're just going roughly 10 above the required cooling. For the interior, I have 2 seats, sport interior, and premium CD for the entertainment. It's power steering and ABS is standard and standard safety. As we saw earlier, though, we're going to have a safety penalty because of the body. As far as the suspension setup goes, I have standard springs, gas monotube dampers, and a passive sway bar. Now, the suspension setup is much more for the sport. Preset is a tweaking of that, and everything goes along with that. So this is much more of a emphasizing the sportiness, which we can see here, and our stats. So let's jump into the test track here. So top speed comes in at 168 miles an hour. We're a little over 3,000 pounds. This is the weight distribution, so we're definitely rear heavy here. And cornering G's, pretty good. So let's run the time. And the time we end up getting is 1 minute 23.94. Definitely the best performance we've gotten thus far, but not too surprising, honestly. Let's jump into the next trim, which is an automatic version of the naturally aspirated engine. So the main difference here is going to be that automatic transmission, which is a 5-speed automatic. Again, this is the first time we have an additional gear with a transmission. All of my other transmissions so far have been 4-speed automatics. This is a 5-speed automatic. The end result of the setup, which is more aggressive, considering the fact that the 5 gears are all acceleration gears. There is no economy gear that goes beyond the estimated top speed. We come out with 5.6 seconds for a 0 to 62 time, so we definitely see a decrease there. And I didn't mention the differential before, but let's just hop in so we can see it's the same. But it's a geared LSD, which is going to be more expensive than a viscous LSD, but it's going to give us better performance overall. We can see that here comparison-wise. Now, we lose out on comfort and off-road, but we gain in drivability and sportiness. Sportiness, definitely the thing that we're going for. So let's hop back into our automatic. All right, so as I mentioned, geared LSD. The tire setup should be the same. And we have, for the brakes, this is going to be the same as well, and we still have no brake fade as well. Aerodynamics is going to be the same. Interior is going to be the same as well. And the suspension setup is going to be pretty much the same. So if we hop into the test track here, we can see that we now get 162.4 miles an hour, so some reduction there. We're a little bit heavier. And I'm noticing a little bit of a drop-off in the cornering Gs right here. So let's see our comparative time. So we end up with 1 minute 25.85. Pretty dramatic difference, but the same kind of thing we've been seeing. It's close to a 2-second drop-off, and it is what it is. It's the way that the automatic transmissions are tuned currently in the game. Let's jump into the turbocharged version. Now, this has a different engine. It's the same engine, more or less, but with a turbocharger added. So now it produces 435 horsepower and 364 foot-pounds of torque. That's quite a lot of power coming out of this V6. And it's also a turbocharged engine, and a pretty aggressive one. So we do see quite a bit of a hit in drivability that we've seen before. And this still has that 6-speed manual that we had before. Now, wheel spin comes in at 5.9%. 0 to 62 time comes in at 4.4 seconds, so we shave off more than half a second there, although we do lose quite a bit in fuel economy. Now, the tire setup is not really changed from before. We have the same brake setup, and again, we have no brake fade, so we're fine there. Aerodynamics is going to be quite a bit different because of the need for more cooling air, but this is going to cause more drag as well, more air resistance. So we're going to have some issues as a result of that, especially for that fuel economy, but also top speed to an extent. The interior is the same. There's not really an upgrade in interior from the standard trim to the turbocharged trim. Now, the suspension is going to be quite a bit different. Not anything over here, but just because of the weight difference. Because we slapped on a turbocharger and intercooler, so that's going to cause it to be heavier. So if we hop into the test track here, we can see that we now are getting a top speed of 179.7 miles an hour. Our weight has gone up as we expected. We're more rear heavy, but we are getting a little bit of a difference in cornering Gs. I see a little bit of a drop here, but an increase here. I'm not sure about the actual speeds in the corners, though. That's one thing I didn't really watch closely. But let's go ahead and get our time. I let that one go a little bit so you could hear the the engine go. But the time we ended up with was 1 minute 20.83. So big improvement. Well, this is the automatic transmission version, but I believe before we got 123.9 something. So we lost more than 3 seconds from the standard to the turbocharged version. With all that power, I would hope so. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the production of the vehicle. So we went with more of a learning focus with this. This is more tech is going into this. More care is going into this. So we're definitely making this more of a learning setup rather than an efficient setup as far as the build. This is not a lot of numbers being produced, but definitely a lot of care going into the design of the vehicle. Moving on, let's go into the actual production. So I have a large factory, and we're producing 282 cars. Now this is between all three of the trims that we're producing that many. And more or less what I did is I have 75 automation, and I went shifts as low as they can go. This increases quality, and also brings up cost. But it also keeps our numbers low, which I think is appropriate for the type of vehicle. And the way I did the production, I figured the manual transmission standard trim would be the most sought after, automatic's a little bit below that, and then the turbo after that. Now, clearly, I did not make an automatic transmission version of the turbo, and I did that on purpose. I felt like it was more appropriate to use a manual transmission for that trim. Of course, you can make arguments for adding an automatic transmission, and, in your role play, you can do that if you wish. For the engine, now there's only one engine, so there's only one factory. Even though there's two variants of that engine, we only need to produce just the one engine. So we have one factory set up. We're producing 282 cars. We're producing 282 engines. And I divided it up. It should be close to the production that we need. So we have 49.9 turbo engines. We're producing 49.9 turbo engines. Now, as far as the production goes, though, I ended up actually having to go with much higher with the shifts to get the engine production out there. And I don't know if it's just because the production unit time of this engine is just so high, it requires that much emphasis. The one thing that I will point out, though, is making it more naturally aspirated engines versus turbocharged engines. It had no effect on how many shifts we needed to produce a number, which is interesting considering the fact that the turbocharged engine should require more production unit time. So I'm not really sure how they come up with the actual production numbers for the engines, but that's the way it went. Before I get into the... we're currently on the turbo engine. I want to start with the base standard trim here, so we can do our market share. So we have a 5% markup. Like we've had with all of our other vehicles. The end price we end up with is $27,000, which I think is one of the more expensive vehicles that we have. But again, I definitely, as we saw with that satellite, this definitely needs tweaking. Maybe we'll see something we saw with the satellite with a cheaper turbocharged trim, which again wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. But let's see what market segments we got. So we've got the muscle car here, which it seems like we always get either the pony car or the muscle car whenever we do any build. We get light sports, premium, and sports. Well, we'll definitely try building a sports car here. So that's what we're looking for. We're also hitting sports budget, light sports, track, and track premium here pretty decently. Although the sports budget is suffering dramatically due to the affordability here, as is the light sports and the track vehicles. Now, honestly, if this was a true track vehicle, we would strip out the interior, make it as basic as possible, and that would drop the price quite a bit, actually. So that is one thing to keep in mind. If we made a true track version of this car, it would drop in price, and it would also go up in performance. So I would expect we would do better in some of these categories, with that being the case. But let's now jump into the automatic trim here. And black screen does not look good to me. Okie dokie. I think the game crashed, so I'll be back in a second. All right, we're back. The game did indeed crash. So this is the automatic trim of the Comet. And now we're hitting a little bit different market segments. We're hitting family sport premium, but we're still hitting muscle and sport as well. And we're doing fairly well in that, although I do see drop-off numbers, I am fairly certain. And I think that's because of the drop-off in sportiness that you get switching to an automatic transmission. Finally, let's take a look at the turbo. And 27,000 still. It might be slightly more expensive. I'm going to do a price comparison real quick here after we're done here. But we're again hitting more or less the same segments. We're hitting light sport, muscle, and sports. And we're not doing quite as well in the light sport here, although we're not that big of a difference from price-wise anyway. So there is a couple of new things that I'm seeing. I see this GT over here. I don't think this was previously visible, so we're now performing pretty well here. But definitely our best categories are the sport, muscle, and light sport. And close behind is track premium. So let's just do that quick price comparison. So we have $27,948 for the turbo, and for the standard, we have $27,168. Hey, if this was real life, I'd take that close to $800 difference for the turbocharged version. I mean, who wouldn't? So, yeah. Any case, let's go ahead and do a comparison here. And I'm only really going to compare a few of the models that we have here. I'm just going to focus on the Constellation, the Comet, and the Satellite, which is our other sporty car. So drivability-wise, this is, it's not too far off, except for the turbocharged version is definitely the lowest of all of our models. I can just tell you that right off the bat. But sportiness is where it's at. So our lowest trim here, which is the automatic, is 36, which is higher than any trim of any model that we have anywhere else. The best trim of the Satellite is producing 33. This is producing 36. So definitely we have an edge here. And once we get into the manual transmission versions, we have 47 and 50. There's a difference of 11 points between the manual transmission version and the automatic transmission version. So definitely strong here. Comfort-wise, we're not too bad off, and this is the reason why I actually went with the sport interior. It dramatically increases the price of the vehicle with no other benefit other than prestige, which I honestly think prestige, you want prestige in a sports car. But another reason I did it is you get a penalty in comfort, and without taking that, this is one of the most comfortable vehicles I have. I mean, look at the automatic transmission version here. It's only 2 points off of the standard trim of the Constellation, which is a trim that's built entirely around comfort, or the model itself is entirely built around comfort. This is only 2 points off, and that's with a penalty for taking the sport interior. So, although we do get a benefit from the premium entertainment, though, so do keep that in mind as well. So those two probably balance each other out. But even still, this is one of the more comfortable vehicles that I have produced. I mean, yeah, the main transmission versions are not as comfortable, but usually the automatics get a benefit in this anyway. So if you compare, for instance, the Comet versus the Satellite, we have 24 versus 26. And if I open up, like, for instance, the Star, we see that it's comparable to the standard trim of the Star, 26 here. So that's really comfortable considering that this is a very performance-oriented vehicle with very stiff suspension that you would think would really hamper its comfort. But in any case, moving along, we have Prestige. This is one of the most prestigious vehicles. As a matter of fact, it beats out the Constellation. For the most part, the 5-liter V8 Premium Constellation matches the standard manual transmission version and actually exceeds the automatic. So close to that there, but once we get into the turbo, this is definitely the most prestigious vehicle. Safety-wise, this is not all that safe, but it beats out the Star and some other vehicles, and we're also considering the fact that this vehicle does have a penalty, so keep that in mind as well. As far as practicality, previously the Satellite was the worst. Now it's the Comet. I think that makes perfect sense. This is a performance-oriented sports car. This is not a practical vehicle. Off-road, I'm fairly certain this is the worst off-road ability. The Luna, I think, previously had it. Yeah, so this is the least off-road vehicle that we have. Again, that makes perfect sense. Utility-wise, it differs depending on the trim, but we're actually not that far off of what the Satellite got. So, again, it's not what we're looking for. Reliability-wise, this is, I would say, on par to be one of the least reliable vehicles we have. But again, I think that makes perfect sense. It's well suited for what we're going for. I mean, this is more pushing it to the edge kind of a build. Although we could have pushed to the edge more so if we wanted to. And then the fuel economy, it's not as bad as, for instance, the pickup truck here. But it's not as good as, for instance, the Constellation, although it's comparable with the manual transmission. But if you, again, apples to apples, automatic to automatic, it's a little bit under what the Constellation is getting here. Weight-wise, it's heavier than a lot of our models here, but it's lighter than things like the Constellation. I'm surprised. I wonder with a comparison with the... Okay, so it's slightly lighter than the Asteroid here. And again, I could have reduced this weight with an aluminum body. And I did mention that I would discuss why I made that choice. One of the big reasons I made that choice is I felt like the car was overperforming what I wanted. It was... with that lighter weight, you're going to have more wheel spin. That's one thing to consider. But also, 0 to 62 time-wise, I actually wanted to bring that time up a little bit. I felt like this vehicle, especially with the turbocharged engine, was just performing a little bit more than I wanted out of the type of vehicle that we were looking for. As far as emissions and stuff, it's not too bad. It's actually better than the Satellite, I would say. As far as cost goes, this is one of the more costly vehicles, but I think that makes sense. And we more or less made it that way on purpose. We could remove that sport interior. We'd lose prestige. But we'd also drop the cost quite a bit. But I wanted this vehicle to cost more than the Constellation. So that's one of the reasons why I made that switch. So in any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner signing out.